When you don't have a strategy, you just look at it for ages and ages saying, what on earth am I going to do with this? It's all about that strategy. You figure out your limitations and you make a strategy around that. I'm Darren, and today I'm really excited because I'm going to show you how to start off a DIY bonsai from common garden material or garden centre stock. You should be able to find material just like this, Potentilla fruticosa, all corners of the globe. It's a pretty widespread plant. The variety is Pink Beauty. They come in all sorts of different colours. So there are two sort of key times to start bonsai. In the winter when everything stops growing and it's dormant, or there's the summer. This is a plant that I've picked up in the summer, so rather than starting with root work, I'm going to be starting with pruning. I'm going to take the plant out of this pot and just tease back some of the surface soil to have a look at the base of the trunk, because sometimes that can really give you some good ideas, inspiration. It can help you decide which is the front of the tree. It's really going to help guide some decisions. Being careful not to break any branches that might come in useful later. I'll find where the trunk is. And there we go. The root system's nice and established, so it's not all going to fall apart. And then with a chopstick, you can use anything really. Some people use knitting needles. You can get proper chopsticks designed for the job, or even just a stick that you've sanded down. I've got a bit of a point. I'm just going to very carefully pull back the soil from the trunk, being careful not to damage any roots. We don't want to disturb any roots at this time of the year. The tree needs them all to function and deliver water to the foliage, but we do just want to just tease it back a bit wherever we can, just so that we can have a look at the base of the trunk. Now for bonsai, we like that the base of the trunk, or nabari as we call it, we like it to be visible in the pot. It gives it a sort of an aged, stable appearance to the tree. But in the nursery industry, it pays them to actually bury them deeper. So for our bonsai purposes, the interesting part of the trunk is always going to be buried quite a long way down. In fact, surprisingly long way down. Sometimes it can actually be at the very bottom of the pot. And all I'm looking for is a bit of a flare to the trunk. You know, it'll be fairly taperless up to a point, and then it'll be flared. I don't really want to go too much further than that. Once I find that flare and some of those structural roots, because I'm not trying to do a repot here. I just want to know where it is, and roughly have a vague idea of what we're working with. I'm ripping a little bit of these fine roots here. I'll get away with it, but I don't want to do too much damage. See if I can't make a better view into what we've got so you can see. I'll probably go a bit further for that reason, but you don't have to go this far. I'm just doing it so that the camera can see in. And so just in here, look, we've got some thicker roots there forming. Hopefully you can see. Round a bit further, it's getting quite tricky to show you, but we've got some more just here as well, and around this side over here, look, there's some more thicker structural roots just in there. It's quite tricky to see in there, and it's all pretty dark, so I'm not sure how well it's showing up on camera, but trust me, they're there. That's the reason I'm stopped. That's what I've been looking for. Minimal damage to those roots, but it's enough to really give us a good steer as to what's going on with this material. One of the most important features of a bonsai is the nabari. It adds stability to the tree. It's a really important feature in terms of suggesting the environment and the direction that the tree possesses. It's an indication of age, and it's what sets a tree apart from a shrub or just an immature plant in a pot. It's the way it really grips that soil. Really adds a really convincing dimension to a bonsai. If you look at trees out in nature, they sort of taper down into the ground, and they've got these big sort of thick roots gripping that soil surface. That's what really, it gives the tree that stability physically, but also visually. And as part of a bonsai composition, it just really gives a very convincing appearance, scale, and It enhances the feeling of scale. Yeah, it's one of the most important features. In fact, so important that really when you're searching out for material, you really want to have a little dig and a feel around. You'll probably get a few funny looks, don't worry about that. We're not doing bonsai because we care about what people think of us. So you get those funny looks. You know you're doing it right then. Try and excuse the fact that I'm just a head floating around and a pair of arms. Sitting down a little bit lower when it's all bushy and looking up, it's a bit easier to see the structure. So that's how we've got it angled for now. When you've got a young plant like this, you're going to make it into bonsai, which is going to involve cutting a lot of branches off and at a later date a lot of roots off. You've got to realise that now the tree has got the most energy that it's ever going to have. So this is the point that we can do the most work and still have confidence that the tree is going to survive. So you've really got to be, I'm not encouraging you to be necessarily brutal for the sake of being brutal, but if you ever find yourself looking at something and think, well, or don't know whether I should cut that off or make that decision later, cut it off, because you're always going to want to remove it later and it will just get harder and harder to make that decision. You'll be more worried about losing stuff, you'll be worried about dieback or whatever. If you're in doubt, just cut it. That being said, the goal here isn't to just hack everything off this tree. We've got a strategy, and the strategy, especially for Potentilla, goes something like this. On this species, every living branch is directly connected to its own system of roots. It might share those roots with other branches and vice versa, but ultimately they're very sort of almost like veins in an arm. If we cut one of those branches and that branch doesn't create buds and continue to survive, it's going to die all the way right back through the trunk, right down into the roots, and you'll have some dead roots and you'll have a dead section of trunk, as well as obviously losing the branch. That might not always be a problem, and there's tactics and strategies around that tendency. But in order to minimise the risk of that, we're always going to make sure that we've got living buds and leaves on a branch that we're pruning. We're only going to cut back as far as those green leaves. Doesn't matter how many leaves doesn't matter how much foliage on a branch we're leaving behind, it can just be one single leaf. But it has to have a leaf alive if we want to guarantee the survival of that branch and avoid dieback down the trunk. If there's a branch that we just completely don't like, it can pay us to still only cut that branch back as far as living foliage, so that we don't then end up with a big section of dead material down the trunk. Luckily, there is a strategy for eventually removing a whole branch without suffering excessive dieback down the trunk, and that is to cut it back as far as we can. That's going to stimulate this species to produce buds right in the crotch of where that branch leaves the trunk. We can then let those buds grow, cut the thick piece back to those buds, and then the buds or whatever that have developed near to that, and then by allowing those buds to grow, we can replace that unwanted branch with thinner branches and continue that cycle until it's completely gone. There will still be a dead portion in that trunk, but we can ensure that there's always living tissue around that dead section, and as it grows it can sort of thicken and cover it over, and it adds this sort of veiny texture to the trunk and looks really good. Of course, there's going to be times where we actually don't mind, or we even want a dead section of trunk as a feature. In that case, go for it, go for your life. But at this stage, when we've just got this, this raw piece of material, we want to play it safe. We don't yet know if we want dirty great deadwood features down the trunk, so we're going to play it safe. So the goal of this operation is to compact this big bushy shrub into a much smaller form so that it looks much more in scale with the trunk that we've got. Once we've done that compaction, we can then see much easier what bits we want to keep, what bits we don't want to keep, and then we can use the strategy to remove unwanted sections, and the strategy is as follows. There's an ideal length for a branch. If there's a leaf like millimeters away, if a branch has a leaf like, I don't know, 2 millimeters away from the trunk, well, that actually would be a branch that's too short. So I want, I want sort of, I don't know, at least 4 or 5 trunk widths of length to each branch that I'm cutting back. So I'm not necessarily going to cut back to the first leaf on every branch, and I am going to cut back to a length on the branch that feels in scale with the trunk. So if it's a big thick trunk, to keep the branch in scale, it can be a bit longer. If it's a thinner trunk, to keep the branches in scale with a thinner trunk, we can cut back, a little bit shorter. But we're always going to make sure we've got living foliage. Now, I like to start at the bottom of the tree and work my way up, and the first branches we've got are here, but in fact what they do is they just skyrocket right up into this tangled mass of bushy growth. So I'm going to leave those alone for now until I can untangle and see what's going on. So I'll start sort of geographically at the bottom of the tree rather than respecting where the branch is on the trunk. So first of all, we've got this sort of quite long branch. It's coming from the trunk somewhere near the top, and it's got lots of side shoots, you see. Got lots of side shoots, each with its own section of green on. I'm going to cut back to the first side shoot. Cut back and left that side shoot on that branch. There's a dead flower head, let's remove that. Then I'm going to cut back to a few leaves on that as well. Here we've got a long wispy weak piece that's coming from the trunk all the way out here. A good guideline is to remove any branches that are growing directly down. This one's growing directly down and it's really weak and long and leggy anyway. I'm just going to remove that one straight away. We don't have to worry about replacing it because it's so thin and there's so many other branches in the area. You can just cut that off. Okay, so let's prune this branch next then. We've got some very tiny leaves here. Let's leave a couple of those because they are quite small. Same on that bit. So that branch there, just give it a wiggle. Just left a little tuft of foliage on the end. That's a strong skyward branch. Might be useful as a leaf just out here. The fine twigs of Potentilla can be quite brittle, so be careful about bending them a bit too far. They will recover fairly well, but it's best not to bend them too much if you can avoid it. I mean, obviously you need to move them a bit to make sense of what's going on and to do the pruning, but just be careful. If you hear any cracks, that's the tree telling you to stop bending. A bit like my spine. Oh dear. I've got a nice a weaker one here. I'll leave several leaves on that piece. More skyward shoots. Cut back to a side shoot on that one. A couple of leaves there. A couple of leaves there. A couple of leaves on that bit. Cut this bit back to some leaves there. Cut this bit back to some leaves there. That's the job done. So this branch has a couple of side shoots, 1, 2, and then the end of the branch comes all the way out here. I can just knit this one back to a side shoot. If we just follow this branch up here, we've got quite a lot of growth coming off it and quite a lot of side shoots as well. I think what we can do at this stage is quite safely cut this side shoot back, this side shoot back, and this side shoot back. And then actually, let's just take that whole thing out. And then we can do a similar thing on this piece. I can see 3 living, no, that's not living. Just cut this dead one off so it doesn't confuse matters. There we go. Is that living? Is this one living? Oh, is it? I think so. Yeah, that's living. So we've got 1 living, 2 living, 3 living pieces. Let's take off the central stem and then cut the others back to some good live shoots. So this great big long thing is just a vertical branch that's just going straight up for the sky. I'm just going to take it out. We don't need to worry about replacing it or anything like that. There's plenty of branches in the nearby vicinity. Let's just be bold with that one. This branch is cutting all the way across. It's another one that's just hanging out straight down. Let's just get rid of that one. When you don't have a strategy, you just look at it for ages and ages saying, what on earth am I going to do with this? It's all about that strategy. You figure out your limitations and you make a strategy around that. In this case, the limitation is we've got to leave leaves. So that's what we're going to do. Just leave leaves. There we go. So this is one of the skyward pieces that's coming from the bottom of the trunk. Going back to what I was saying about replacing thicker branches or removing thicker branches, we've got a thick straight piece here that I don't want. Don't want that one. And we've actually got a thinner piece coming from just below it. So I want to keep this. This is important. This is going to give me a live vein to use to disguise this cut. So I want to keep this bit. Let's just cut it back to some foliage. And that means that that straight bit that I don't want to keep, I can actually cut that as far as I can safely back without leaving leaves this time. And so you can see it's gonna die back a bit to some roots down here. That's definitely going to die back. Maybe we'll get some buds in and around it as a result of all this pruning. We might get some buds, but essentially there's going to be a dead stem that goes through to the roots there. But because I've got this section because I've got this little piece of growth right in its junction, I'll be able to grow this a bit, thicken it, and it'll disguise that dead section of material. See if I can't just do a better job of cutting that bit out. All the way over there. So there's a branch that starts off on this. It's crossing over, it's crossing in front of the trunk down there, underneath another branch, and it ends up here. Well, that's just crazy, and it's coming from the crotch of another branch, so I know I'm not going to get excessive dieback from doing that. So let's just get it out of the way. Anything that's doing anything crazy, like crossing in front of other branches, usually an easy decision, especially if there's stuff nearby that you can replace it with. Okay, finally, where does this come from? It's coming from in here. There's a whole big jumble of branches in here. This is one of them. Let's cut back to the first green side shoot, which is this. Just cut it back. There we go. Okay, so we are done with the cutback. And the reason I can be so confident making that cutback is because of the thickness of the trunk and therefore the scale of the tree we're working with. There is no way that anything outside of this silhouette would ever be useful as a bonsai. If I'd have kept all of that, it would have just looked like a shrub that we've put in a shallow pot. I don't want to show you how I'm making trees that I'm dissatisfied with in 2 years. I'm showing you how I make trees that I love and have trouble selling because I love them so much, like little children. That's what I want to show you how to make. This is how we're going about it. Right, so now I'm studying the structure. I'm looking for any like gnarly issues, and there's a couple of things that catch my eye. So we've got this primary branch here. It's coming out here. And then from that primary, we've got this branch that comes up here. But it's actually crossing over another primary just above it, this one. And that one's coming further up on the tree. And we don't want that cross. The cross itself isn't particularly aesthetically pleasing, but also we're sort of not respecting the hierarchy of the tree. This branch is higher, so its foliage should really be higher. This branch is lower, so its foliage should be lower than this one. And yet we've got this anomaly sticking right up and crossing in front. So let's just cut off the anomaly. So here we've got a branch that starts almost as a secondary of this branch here. It's coming from the trunk just about there. And here we've got a nice primary branch that starts about there. But this one's reaching higher than this one, and to do so it's crossing over in quite an ugly, twisted, knotty situation here. That's only going to get worse in time. Because the anomalous branch is coming from a section of the trunk that already has some live material to continue developing that vein, I'm not worried about any dieback. Dieback might happen, but we've got a living vein right next door that's going to help us to disguise any dieback that we might not want. But I can quite happily, at least regarding the risk of dead sections of trunk, I can come in and make that snip. There we go, that's much more attractive without that ugly twist. If you like the ugly twist, that's your decision, but I felt like it was necessary to get rid of it. Then there's just one more weird crossing situation where there's this piece of primary structure going up here, and from behind it we've got a secondary branch going underneath it, and then from beyond it we've got another secondary branch coming backwards behind it. Let's just wiggle it. That one's crossing, this one's crossing. Do I want to keep any of those? No, not really. There's plenty of branches nearby that I can use in their place, so I'm just going to cut them off, get them out of that weird triangle formation that they're creating. There we go. Here and there are still some weird branch formations, but that is the scope of the initial work done. Does this mean that we're finished? Absolutely not. This was just the first move in creating a bonsai. At Gro Bonsai, I'm dedicated to helping you to create beautiful bonsai in a sustainable manner that means that the success of the tree and the success of the grower. So I'm not now going to tell you to shove this into a tiny pot and make do with whatever health issues crop up later. We've done this initial cutback. That's all we need to do right now in the middle of summer. Now what we need to do, get it back into its pot, cover these roots over, we'll give it some fertiliser, and we'll let the plant respond. And it's going to respond by extending these shoots. There'll be buds coming from elsewhere on the trunk, there'll be buds coming from the crotches of the branches. We'll just get a myriad of buds, we'll let them grow, let them do its thing, and then we'll come back later in the year to perform the second working of this tree to continue its journey to becoming a beautiful bonsai.